We live our entire lives knowing that death awaits us. Many believe that some part of us endures. Eyewitnesses swear to have seen spirits of the dead haunting the living, and even appearing during alien abductions. Is the UFO mystery reaching out to us from beyond the stars, or from beyond the grave? This staggering implication demands not only scrutiny of the UFO phenomenon, but near-death experiences, ancient monuments, ley lines, the Fey folk, cryptids, and more. I'm Joshua Cutchin. I'd like to invite you into the ecology of souls, a new mythology of death and the paranormal, a comprehensive theory of all things supernatural framed through the lens of our final transition. Join me as we journey from the depths of prehistory to the present, from the outer space of the cosmos to the inner space of the self. Ecology of Souls, Volumes 1 and 2, now available from Amazon in print and as a combined ebook. Welcome to the Ecology of Souls.
Welcome to Kentucky.
The birthplace of Abraham Lincoln and built on the largest cave system in the known world. The home of Daniel Boone, Hunter S. Thompson, horse racing, and bourbon.
But when the hour grows late, the Bluegrass state becomes the breeding ground for realms beyond those familiar to the human race. In the east, ghosts, spirits, and ethereal entities roam the hills and hollers.
In the north, Mothman beats his wings along the banks of the Ohio River.
To the west, small green creatures stalk farmhouses and disappear without a trace when shot.
While in the south, the energy of the Veiled Witch is palpable just over the border. Joining with us as we investigate just what goes wrong in the Bluegrass night.
And ask the question, how many coincidences are too many? There's no need to check the clock.
There's no need to check the clock. Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion.
And it's midnight.
It's midnight. In Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky. Since the inception of the comic book medium, aliens, monsters, and extra-dimensional entities have always been stars of the color-soaked page. This commitment of ethereal to panel a pop culture reiteration of otherworldly phenomena continually finding a prominent place in the folklore of various cultures since the dawn of human history. Tonight on Midnight in Kentucky, we speak with comic aficionado and owner of the Bluegrass State's largest comic book store, Jason Stevens, as well as folklorist and editor of Kentucky Folklife Digital Magazine, Delainey Bowers, who together host the podcast Comic Virgin. When not immersed in graphic novels, however, Delainey and Jason have also embarked on several investigations of the supernatural, paranormal, and out-and-out weird over the years. In this episode, we discuss the through line between comics, folklore, and the phenomena at large, a few of Delainey and Jason's more profound encounters with the unexplained, the ontological nature of the phenomena itself, and much more. Join us on our strange travels once again, Nightowls, as we go in conversation with Jason Stevens and Delainey Bowers on an episode straight out of a comic book, the MIK Comic Virgin crossover event of the summer. Night owls of all times, places, spaces, and ages. Welcome back to Midnight in Kentucky. We are here with Jason Stevens and Delainey Bowers from the Comic Virgin podcast. Thank you guys so much for coming. We appreciate it. Let's start out with the standard, how did you guys get into this? Little backstory. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. For just comics in general or the podcast?
Give me the whole thing. All right. I'm going to be real with you right here on the air, man.
Okay.
You kind of appeared to me in my life. Like, you're almost like this egregore that just appeared one day.
You could have brought me into existence.
I was a big fan, obviously, of Little Monsters when Little Monsters was in Somerset. Mm-hmm. And there for a while, and I kind of got out of the scene for a little bit, but it didn't seem like we had a comic shop in Somerset. We had to go to Louisville, we had to go to Lexington, a lot of comic conventions. Mm-hmm. And then one day, the Lemon McGee sign shows up, and I'm like, the fuck is this? And I wandered into the store and bought a bunch of weird stuff. And I know that you worked for MTV for a little bit. Mm-hmm. I would love to hear about that. And I had this other show where, I talk about spirituality and art and all these not so paranormally focused. And I've thought about getting you on there for a while. Yeah. But man, we can do it. Spill it on here. Let's tell me your story. I would love to hear it.
All right, yeah. So I don't know. Always been like a lifelong comic fan. Growing up, there weren't really places, I guess, to buy comics in Somerset. There was the bookstore and stuff, but as a young kid, it was always like yard sale finds. And so I grew up reading a lot of older comics, especially Marvel and DC, X-Men, just whatever I could find at these yard sales. And so then eventually, when I was old enough to buy comics, and there were comic shops during that 90s boom, I was picking these up, but also like I was aware of all these old storylines, so I felt like I've come into it like the right way overall. And yeah, so I was just always into comics, and of course I was a shopper at Little Monsters that was in Somerset for years. And just over that time, like me and my buddies, like we made some indie comics, and we've just done different stuff. I ended up working at Little Monsters for a while, which was great. And during that time, like I was introduced to podcasting. We did some wrestling podcasts that were fun, and horrible, horrible things you never want to listen to again.
Hey, man.
They were just the worst.
I understand
the worst. And yeah, during that time, I started working at MTV for MTV Geeks website. So I was covering mostly action figures and toys, but I covered some comic stuff as well. And they would fly me up to New York for the New York International Toy Fair, and they would fly me out to San Diego Comic-Con, and it was basically just living this big geek dream of just getting like hot toys and new Ninja Turtles and stuff in the mail, and just taking photos and reviewing them and just having a good time. And that went on for a while, and then things happened with that site internally with MTV, and then me and some of the producers at MTV got together and we did freaksugar.com, which is still going to this day. It's an awesome pop culture website. My buddy Jed Keith is the editor-in-chief there, and he takes care of a lot of stuff. And yeah, so we were selling comics at Little Monster, and it closed down, and there were some things that happened, and yada yada. A year or so later, my buddy Jim Sears, who was the owner of Little Monster at the time, we were selling comics out of my house on Facebook.
Dude, that's awesome.
So a couple days a week, we were doing live sales on Facebook, and otherwise I was just working wrestling shows. And then, and then it was kind of a thing. One of our friends got a hold of us, Jeremy, and he was like, man, why don't you guys open a store? We really didn't want to. It's a lot of work.
Yes.
But we were like, well, if we're going to, we're going to make the store that we want to have. And so we did. So now we have the largest comic book and collectible store in the state of Kentucky in Somerset. And we opened our game store on the front of the building last August. And it's been going great with, Pokemon, Magic, D&D, all that. And yeah, we've just been holding strong. We opened it up about a month before COVID hit in 2020. So we had to shut down almost immediately. Customers have really held strong with us through all of that and getting stuff shipped to them. So we're able to weather the storm until we're able to open back up and get our staff back and everything. And so, yeah, man, now it's just 7 days a week, just rocking and rolling.
And you really do. And this is something that initially blew my fucking mind, because I was always the kid that wanted to open like a record comic bookstore stage, the whole experience. And you guys really do that.
Yeah, man, everything. We do new vinyl records. We're a sideshow dealer, so we sell all the new like hot toys and stuff that come out. Of course, Funko Pops are huge. Right. All the action. I'm a big action figure guy, so naturally we get every cool action figure that exists. We average like 75, 80 new titles a week, and that doesn't include all the different covers. It's just, yeah, man, we get everything. All the new Pokemon, all the new, just all of it. It's constantly shilling out money for product every single day, practically.
Yes. Business.
Yes, and hoping people come in and find the thing they want.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, I definitely want to go in more on that later, because you seem like you have a epic backstory. Without being weird, I have often laid in bed at night and thought, I wonder what Jason Stevens' backstory is.
That's
like an origin comic.
That's good. That's good. I like that. I like to think that everybody thinks that. Delaney's shaking her head.
Don't encourage it. Please don't. Just like nip it in the bud right here is what needs to happen.
Okay, well, so did lemon juice lead to comic version? Is that what led to the podcast?
Yeah, kind of. I guess just having more access to the books, and Delainey and I were talking about it, and what was the origin of that podcast? Was it you?
I mean, yes.
We're gonna say yes. We're gonna say Delainey came up with the entire idea, because I honestly don't remember. I'm sure we batted around doing stuff together, and then we landed on that, and then it just kept going back to that premise of her reading books for the first time. We came up with the name really quickly, because we were going to do a paranormal podcast initially, because we've gone to a lot of ghost hunts, we do a lot of things, and we just couldn't figure out a hook that would set us apart, since there are so many now.
What are your origins in the supernatural, paranormal? How did you come to that?
Oh, that's just kind of always been a thing, I think. When I was young, very religious household, growing up, Pentecostal background, so nobody a big fan. I couldn't watch The Simpsons. So not a lot of that. Yet I did manage to watch X-Files growing up. Okay. And so that was always a thing that kind of stuck.
How did you manage the X-Files but not The Simpsons? I'm curious about that.
I think that
was the same block there.
Yeah, but I think that either they replayed it or Dad would watch it sometimes too. I think it was serious enough. If they said damn on a live action show, it's not as big a deal. If it's an animated show and it says damn, that's obviously warping a child's mind.
Totally right.
Yeah.
And a very similar thing to me, very religious household. My parents and sisters were in love with The Simpsons, so that was kind of my pop culture entrance point. You know what I mean? But my dad, not so much. But I remember watching the X-Files when it would rebroadcast at 9 p.m. on Sunday nights with him, and that was my snap off.
Yeah. So a lot of that stuff, and just being afraid of everything in general. I would catch glimpses of stuff like The Exorcist, like way too young, and at friends' houses and things. And so there was a lot of that, because where I wasn't supposed to be watching it all, when we would go to sleepovers and stuff and we would watch like Nightmare on Elm Street, I was probably far more afraid of it than you should be, because I mean they're laughable now basically, right. But at the time, no.
I think it was also because I'm very similar. I think it was also kind of, we weren't supposed, that it was that forbidden thing too that made it, so you know what I mean. For sure.
Yeah. And Delainey and I, when we started hanging out, it just kind of became a real quick thing of the supernatural, just that we were both just very interested in it, and things like Hellier and stuff helped push that, more to the forefront of like, oh yeah, we should just go explore these places. Let's just go to Point Pleasant. Let's just go do these things.
So Delainey, how did you come? I know you're a folklorist. I actually rewatched your Liminal Lodge appearance.
That was really
cool. I enjoyed that.
Nathan was very kind enough to invite me onto that. Yeah, I don't know if I don't have like a super sexy, cool background like Jason does. I will say that I went to undergrad at Appalachian State in North Carolina, and so that's like in the heart of the Blue Ridge. So my connection to folk studies started around then. I was like 2008 or so. I was just really into like shape note singing and contra dancing and like these sort of traditional Appalachian practices, but like I didn't really have a connection to that. I'm originally from Indianapolis, so like the third largest metropolitan city in the Midwest. I'm like sort of like but somewhat removed from that.
Indiana is still a very, very liminal.
It's a weird flyover drive-through state. I was just up there last week, and I was like, I've been on this road for like hours. Like, what is this place? I mean, it's so important to me. It feels like home because it is home, but just, I'm just like at a loss for words trying to describe the place where I'm from, because it doesn't leave such a lasting impression.
For sure. Yeah, I get what you mean. But I had a guy recently on one of the Patreon episodes, Transmissions from the Abyss, and he was going into all the stuff, paranormal stuff from Indiana, because I kind of try and get all around Kentucky, and you guys have a lot of weird stuff. A lot of ghost stories come from Indiana.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking my dad was born and raised in Indiana as well, and like there's this one sort of like famous family folk story that we have where he was like 12 or 13 and was doing his morning paper route, and he was followed by a giant orb of light. And as he like pedaled faster, the light would speed up behind him, just this orb. And he's really hesitant to tell it, and he's like very sort of dismissive about it.
Sure.
I don't think he wants to like
So this
delve too deeply. Yeah, my dad. Yeah.
Tell it one more time. He was.
Yeah, it was like an early morning paper route that he had. They sort of lived in a small community. And from what I remember, he was, delivering papers on his bicycle. There was a giant orb of light that, like, came down from the sky. He saw it, got, like, very scared, naturally, started pedaling faster, and the orb, like, chased him. And then it started running or, like, floating parallel to him. And I think there might have been some connection with like a military practice. They lived like relatively close to a military like army base if they were like practicing on things. But yeah, and I just love that story.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I've never heard that. I don't think.
that is a
John Bowers is like a very mysterious man. So
I mean, that name alone sounds like a
Big John.
But I mean, that's almost like a E.T. I guess it's the bicycle in there. That's
right.
it,
It's really. Mm-hmm.
but like a Stranger Things-esque, like that's a good story.
Which Stranger Things is in Indiana as well. Well, Hawkins, Indiana.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think my mom also has a story of they lived in this like giant farmhouse for a little while, and they were at sort of a crossroads where people would break down a lot, right? So they would always have like strangers coming to their home, sort of like asking for directions or to use the phone. She mentioned that one night when she was in high school, she was the only one who was at home, so everyone else was sort of gone for the night. She left, came back, and like all of the cabinets in the kitchen were open, you know, like one of those types of stories. And I'm always just like, man, really wish something like that would have happened to me. Although if it had, I think, I would have lost my marbles.
No,
so
for sure. Like, it's that whole Chapel Perilous thing of how close do I want to get to all of this before I'm driven out of my mind.
Yes.
Yeah. We've always said that we're just too thirsty for it, so we get none of it. We get none of it.
And I think our co-host John, who ironically does the show with me, he always says that I don't have a very good gauge for weird stuff because I deal with so much weird stuff that when something weird happens to me, I'm like, that wasn't that weird. I want like
that's fair.
A Sasquatch walking through the field or, something crazy. I had a bloody footprint on my porch maybe a couple years ago.
Like human size? Like in a shoe?
Oddly enough, it was like this big. It was not big at all. It was like a baby footprint. And, we have fins, so I was
like a barefoot baby footprint or a shoe?
Like a barefoot baby footprint.
Ooh, creepy babies.
Creepy baby.
Too far. I can deal with adults. But and the front, the front like screen had been tore off the window and stuff. But looking at it from my perspective, I was like, well, the wind got up. Finn probably, cut his foot. Something weird happened, which he hadn't cut his foot. I mean, I'm not a bad parent. I'm not like,
look at the kid's rolling around in glass over here trying to get in the house.
Yeah, no, nothing like that. I promise. But John come and he saw it and he was like, "Nah, dude, that's fucking weird." So I'm a really bad judge of like how weird is too weird, So, but talk a little bit about folklore as a study.
Yeah. So I did the graduate program at Western Kentucky University out in Bowling Green. And so I worked in the Folklife archives there, so Folklife graduate assistant, just getting to work with a bunch of collections, and it was just really cool, like digitizing a lot of content, a lot of materials as well, and just like, because I'm not originally from Kentucky, just like getting to see the practices here was really cool. But in that program, we have like the history, like one of the classes is just sort of dedicated to theoretical groundwork for that. And yeah, I mean, there's like a clear distinction between European folklore and like folk studies, and then how that influenced North American folk studies as well. So, I mean, you go back on the European side to like ancient antiquities, right? So we have like that conversation, and then we have like classic Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, right? And so their publication in the late 1860s. Oh gosh, nope. Dates wrong. No one comment on this like very incorrect day that I just gave.
I'm a folklorist.
Yeah, well, listen. I told Jason, I was like, I need to bring my notes. Like, I do so well with notes.
I want to know things too.
Yeah. 1846, Kinder und Hausmärchen. There we go. So that's what it was. And their approach from the beginning was to see people who told these stories and sang these songs were not like original creators of them, but rather just like vessels, right? So people were just like, oh, we have this knowledge, but they never took into consideration that they were the ones who were creating those things, which is like, from a contemporary perspective, it's like, well, yeah, we're all like creative. We all know how to like make these things that are reflections of our past and our experiences.
Is that a dismissal, do you think, of those people?
Oh, absolutely. That's totally what it is. And so, like, there were all these collection efforts by these sort of, like, academics who would, like, make major edits to these people's stories just so that they would be, like, more readable or something along those lines. And so, yeah, just they were, like, European peasants. And so no one's going to give them the benefit of the doubt as, like, just a big bummer, right? So really sad.
And I mean, I think though that directly correlates to the paranormal.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, we have a lot of witnesses who are not affluent, whatevers,
right.
And they're wrote off as drunk country bumpkins who don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Right,
oh yeah,
right.
Certainly.
And so you have that major sort of like hierarchy of like, we're the elite, we are like learned, we're going out and we're collecting these things to show that they are like remnants of an older past. So these things are very quickly dying, they're fading away. We need to gather them up and disseminate them as quickly as possible so we don't forget like where we came from.
Absolutely.
So there was that aspect to it. And if we were to look at like North America, that was towards the late 1880s is when like it became sort of like a more solidified study in the United States.
Which is
not very old.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And so we can sort of like mark the field of folk studies by these like 1910s, 1930s, 50s, 70s, and like today. So all of those have like different folklorists who are really sort of leaving their mark, different methodologies, different theories, different practices. And I mean, now we have some like digital creators who are like folklorists who are using Twitch and Discord and YouTube, and it's just like really cool to be a part of.
That is, and which I thought was really interesting because you were talking with Nate and you guys were kind of talking about how there are folklorists that are now studying like COVID and Q and all of these like really like, to me, I don't think I would touch those things with a 10-foot pole.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not. Please don't ask me any questions about
it. I will not comment. But I think that that's really interesting because, it does because without getting deeply into this, I feel like there are factions that would be like, those things are better left undiscussed. And we don't need to talk about the ideas that these people had about these things for this reason or this reason or this reason. But just like you said, it's kind of doing away with where we come from. In 100 years, what will folklorists study about? Will they come back and say, will those studies be about, do you remember all the crazy conspiracies that come around at the time of, because that is interesting to me. And I've always come at this, I love the stories of the UFO crashes. I love the stories of, something walking around in the woods. But really what it comes down to is how this affects people, how all of these things affect people. And I've always really been interested in that because, the stories get weirder and weirder and weirder the more you go. And it's kind of like what we were talking about before we started broadcasting. You kind of got to decide, well, is this consensus reality? Is this a real event? Or is this something that is more akin to, a vision, spiritual thing? So I thought that was really interesting. And I had never thought about the full spectrum of like folklore studies.
Oh yeah. And one of the terms that I like to use, I'm the managing editor for or I should say editor-in-chief. That makes me sound like slightly better.
Yeah, that's
Step up for a digital magazine called Kentucky Folklife, which is sponsored through the Kentucky Folklife program at Western. And so it's a publication that's sort of made possible from a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So like federal funds are
PBS
coming.
thing, right?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. NEA and the NEH for humanities there. But so if we were to think of like sort of folklore as a hierarchy, maybe we have folklife at the very top, which is encompassing of like all creative traditions and everyday practices. And folklore, like heavy emphasis on the lore part, right? Like the telling, the oral version. So like songs, ballads, poetry, narrative folk tales, stuff along those lines. And so, you can sort of break that down a little bit further if you want to. I like using the term folk life just because it is more encompassing.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the two are practically interchangeable. So it's a different way of looking at our sort of like traditional endeavors.
But that definitely, I'm big on words because definitions are a lot of anything really. And that does kind of encompass everything from like rituals and to, because there's a lot of stuff in folklore that you may have to go back and reference that you have no idea what they're talking about if you have no idea what the people were actually like. Right. So yeah.
And so it encompasses like material culture as well. So like tangible things that we can hold, like customs and sort of like verbal. So again, we're just like breaking these down into different genres. And even though there is like not one maybe like unifying grand theory that ties everything together, because like, yikes, why would you even want to attempt something like that? It does. We can use folklore or folklife as just a different type of lens to use, right? So it's like a part of our evaluative toolkit. So like I'm going to look at this through the lens of folklore. What does that say about our culture, our heritage, like our connections with our communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings up a whole ton of questions. But first, I want to get to this.
Yes.
What do you both think the connections, and this is kind of taking it off another road, but we're gonna come back. What do you guys think the connections between paranormal, high strangeness, supernatural, and the comic medium has been thus far?
I'm going to let you go with that one while I formulate my answer over here.
I mean, I think that initially with, the advent of superheroes and stuff, that just comes from people's wish and thoughts of, being better and all that. Like Superman has every power and existed because he was the first one, But as far as like high strangeness and stuff in general in comics and just like those subject matters, the last several years, it has been very prevalent. Just the horror genre and stuff. My favorite comic currently coming out right now is Department of Truth, which is basically the story of a secret department called the Department of Truth that is beneath the Pentagon, that is run by Lee Harvey Oswald. And he is in charge of keeping conspiracy think from becoming tulpas and egregores in reality, because general consensus makes our reality. So when too many people think the earth is flat, it becomes flat.
This sounds amazing.
Which is issue 1.
What's the name of it?
Department of Truth.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. James Tynion IV is the creator on that, the writer, and he's also the writer of Something is Killing the Children, which is our latest episode of the podcast, which is also another horror comic. Yeah. And there's just a lot, so much right now as far as horror anthologies are really hot right now. There was a comic that they've started reprinting that came out a few years ago called the Perhapanauts, which is a team of Bigfoot, Chupacabra, and other various cryptids that go with the government to fight stuff. Kind of like the BPRD and Hellboy, which Hellboy is probably the most famous of that type of genre of like Mike Mignola doing his research about world paranormal things and then putting them in a way like the Baba Yaga and things like that people can understand, and then have Hellboy whip the shit out of them.
Yeah, very much so, 100%. Another one of those, and this is kind of, because you go through phases. I was a big paper tray person at first. I would buy the issues as they were coming out. And then that got way too daunting as an adult.
It can become a lot.
It got to be a lot. So I got to be a collected graphic novel. One of the first comics as I was getting back into the medium, probably 25 or 26, I got was the new Sabrina comics.
Oh, the Chilling Adventures? Yes. Yeah, the dark ones.
Oh, man. That was my reintroduction to so much, that comic. And in a lot of ways, and obviously they took a lot of liberties with Sabrina, but that was almost my reintroduction to magic in a way, with a K, magic with a K.
Yeah.
Because as a kid, I had read a lot of different books and a lot of different things, but you grow up, things happen, you put it away, and then that all started sparking back on. Oh shit, this is that thing that I read about when I was 13. Yeah. That, and then that slowly bled into paranormal chupacabra. And then here we are.
Yeah, and when it comes to magic with a K in comics, of course, the biggest influences there are the Vertigo books, like Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, where he wrote that, and during the time of writing that, put himself in the book as King Mob, and then saw his reality change. In fact, when the book was getting canceled, he put out that basically a group working of everyone believing that it's not going to get canceled, and it didn't get canceled. And then, of course, before him, Alan Moore, who, while he didn't create Swamp Thing, he did create John Constantine, who is easily the most famous, probably the most famous chaos magician, real or imagined.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There's the whole instance with Alan Moore.
And there's the actually, not just him. I think there are 3 writers. I think Morrison is one of them as well. And maybe, I can't think of the third one. But there are several writers who have written Constantine over the years who have said they have met John Constantine.
No way.
Yeah. Or at least seen him. And so people have worked on like Hellblazer and stuff like that. And so he was my introduction into like chaos magic. And then, of course, there was like Garth Ennis's Preacher, which is just insane and fun, but it's wild. But yeah, I've been practicing chaos magic in various amounts for several years, and it's probably because of John Constantine introducing me into the subject overall. Yeah,
my introduction into chaos magic was for sure Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison changed my fucking life, man.
Any listeners who there's a YouTube video where Grant Morrison is talking at a conference, basically describing how creating art and literature is chaos, and how to. He literally tells you how to work chaos magic. He tells you how to make a sigil. He does it all in like 15 minutes. So feel free to search that video out if you haven't seen it.
In the show notes. I'm so glad you were talking about this. I have talked about the Invisibles incessantly on this fucking show because of this shit. Like, it incorporates so much into it. One of my favorite things in the Invisibles, huge spoiler alert for anybody listening, is the whole panel where it's talking about the Roswell crash, and it says this was the day that the creator crashed into his creation.
Oh yeah, they do so much in that. It was well early for its time. Like, if the Invisibles was coming out now, there would be no chance it would be canceled. Like, it would be hot property. They would be making a movie or a Netflix show.
And I'm hoping that still happens.
It very well could.
Cool. I'm so glad you brought that up, though. I will include that in the show notes, everybody. Be sure to check that out, because that is some.
Yeah, the Invisibles Volume 1, primarily for Comic Virgin, which
I was going to ask you, are you guys doing the Invisibles?
We will eventually, because the way we work with Convergent, of course, it's me, giving Delainey something to read for the week, and then we talk about it, and it's her first time. That's the Comic Virgin, and generally it has been volume 1s of graphic novels or one-off graphic novel stories, because it's just easier to process than single issues. And the Invisibles, they're on my bookshelf. They're there. It's just, I'm not sure when we'll tackle it, but I'm sure when we do, it'll be a long-ass episode. It'll be so long.
It's a big undertaking. Yes. It's a huge undertaking. And, dude, there's so much in that book that I read it the first time, and I was like, oh, I get this. I understand this. Went back and read it the second time, and I was like, "Oh, this is a whole fucking different book."
Oh yeah, after I read it initially as it was coming out, and I liked it. I liked it okay, but a lot of it was just over my head at the time. And because I mean, it came out like in the '90s, and I was still in school and stuff, and then, but then after reading several books by Peter Carroll and everything, and then going back and rereading it, mostly because the last podcast on the left guys were talking about, I was like, oh yeah, The Invisibles, I'm gonna go back and read that, and I did, and I was like, oh shit, like I understand all this now, like this is really great and smart and awesome.
But man, you're right, like it goes totally over your head unless you kind of have that introduction to magic 101.
Yeah. Oh, but I'm sure all those guys in England who were on that scene in the 80s when that book was coming out, oh shoot, they were probably loving it.
This is it. This is the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Delainey, enough time to formulate an answer?
Yeah, I think so. Well, no, I mean, this is also just like a sort of like a classic, like you should know this as a folklorist, right? Sure. So when we think of like high, medium, and low art, or not even art necessarily, but just like approaches to traditions and studies and research and crafting, all of those things, that like at the top you have sort of like academia, right? Like institutions of higher learning, and like obviously there's a lot of like gatekeeping that goes along with that, but you're coming at it from a very elite, very like knowledgeable, informed sort of, we all understand the man, right? Like we get it. And at the opposite end of that spectrum, low, we can think of as like folklore, right? Being created by the people, being shared through like oral means of transmission, often sometimes like very anonymous. We don't know who created it or like its origins. It's just there, it's passed on, and it serves some sort of function. In the middle, we can sort of understand that as like pop culture. So it's like mass media. We do know its creators, but it's circulated among both ends, right? Okay, so
that's interesting. I'd never really thought about that.
Yeah, and so when we think of like pop culture, and like comics and what we're doing. Again, we know they're creators. We know it's just like it's a weird balance. There was a term that came out maybe in the early like 2010s by Michael Dylan Foster, who's a folklorist. He came up with the term folkloresque. So it's things that aren't necessarily folklore, but they've been created by someone, and we know who that creator is, but they do have elements and shades of folklore to them. So we think of like soot sprites in like My Neighbor Totoro, right? Yeah, so like and like that's something that we can think of as being like folklore-esque, because they don't necessarily exist. Like Miyazaki was the one to create soot sprites, but they do have like an ethereal element to them. So I mean, it's just interesting to consider it from that perspective.
Where do things like, let me think of a good one, like Slender Man fit on that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Good question. And now you're putting me on the spot. No, and we can think of things that are like born digital, right? That are like born on the internet, and then how are they circulated? So they're like being shared on message boards. Sure. They have to be talked about and shared in some sort of way. It's individuals who are sharing them. It's not like giant corporations who are like sending this stuff out.
It's not like a Mickey Mouse or
and it takes on its own lore as it continues to develop. And so there's another term that we have that's called traditionalization. Okay, so we have traditionalization, which it sort of like stems from the twin laws of folklore, which is that folklore is both static and dynamic. So static meaning that like some shape of folkloric belief or practice is passed along throughout the generations. So if we take maybe like Christmas time as an example, the way that we celebrate Christmas is like pretty standard. We have like a Christmas Eve, we have Christmas morning, maybe like you have a Christmas routine or tradition that you do on,
Excuse my cardinal. He kind of just flies in and hits the window every now and again.
Oh, yeah. I was hoping when I saw that had never happened before, so then there would be something going on.
This is it. Yeah. It's happening right now.
Yeah. It is an odd story, though. sidebar. So this is my grandmother's house. We're working on buying it. When we told the family about Finn, it was on Halloween night of all evenings. And as soon as we told them, this cardinal flies in.
As far as like folklore that I've grown up with,
that belief right there,
it's the soul of someone that you know.
And I had to dig into that because I knew when that cardinal flew in, I was like, this is a sign. But at the time, I was more like, oh fuck, I got a kid coming. What the fuck am I gonna do? You always discount those things. And then we moved in here, and that cardinal lands on there and hits the screen every day. And our cat has a whole thing with it, and Finn has a whole thing with it, and they're just best friends now. So.
She's like, Ben, let me inside, please.
This is your grandmother, Benjamin. Let me in. But anyway, Christmas time.
Yeah, Christmas time. So again, there are all these sort of practices that go along with it. But every year, I'm just thinking of something that our family did. Is that you make new traditions, right? That and then that gets embedded into your family folklore. And then it could slightly change the next year, So it's always evolving. It's always changing, but you still have the core elements.
Maybe this is kind of dumbing it down too much, but folklore is something that keeps coming. It never stops.
Oh, it never stops. It's always been around. And it's just the way that we choose to research it or analyze it or classify it, right? I think there's always that need to what is it? What does it look like? How is it practiced? And sometimes you just gotta let it breathe a little bit, It exists, and I think sometimes that's good enough.
I kind of come back to this whole thing about I use Star Wars as an analogy a lot, and how Star Wars is a perfect mythological representation of a lot of different things, and how 1,000 years from now. Maybe they look back at the time and they see Star Wars and how we...
There's a very good chance that Star Wars, it just depends how things play out, but it could very well be hundreds of years from now, it's the Bible.
No, 100%. And that's exact because, you get these archetypes and you get these repeating myths Vader is the opposite side of the tree of life. Vader is, the dark side. That's... The Black Lodge in Twin Peaks, the Upside Down in Stranger Things, this recurring darkness on the other side. Yeah. On the other side. Yeah. So
and especially the originals, they're very much like morality tales and they're easy to consume. They're easy to retell orally. Yeah. I could tell y'all everything that happens in Star Wars: A New Hope in no time.
Exactly.
But there's also tons and tons and tons of stuff being added all the time. There's all those novels, even though some of them are technically not canon. There are those. Mm-hmm. There are tons of TV shows now. There's all of the toys and totems that exist. Yes. There's so much Star Wars. I dare say there's probably more Star Wars merchandise, almost more than there is. I don't know. I don't know if there's more lightsabers and crucifixes around, but it's probably getting close.
That was a good pull. So an interesting thing about that, though, and I'm Jamie and I discuss this a lot, probably to the point where she's like, "Shut the fuck up." But the interesting thing about all those books that you were talking about is literally we call them canon and non-canon, right? That's straight out of the Bible. We have non-biblical canon and biblical canon. It's the same thing. And I wonder if, and this is probably a little too far, but I wonder if people will look back on Disney's acquisition of Star Wars and be like, that was King James taking
changing it all.
Yeah.
They're kind of like that now already, to be honest.
That's fair. Yeah, that's true. So in saying how you could almost say that comics are one form of how we have, I don't want to say religiosity, but how we have spiritualized the paranormal in an odd way, or high strangeness in a way, or how I guess maybe we've adapted it more into pop culture.
Certainly. And I think as we've seen with especially the MCU and all that, and just overall as and just how long the DC characters have been around. You can go to almost anywhere in the world and people can identify Superman and Batman. Absolutely. They might not be able to identify the X-Men, but Superman and Batman are them and Wonder Woman are an actual trinity. Like, people know who they are, and they're these demigods that everybody knows about, and very much moral characteristics. You know, Batman doesn't kill, Superman doesn't kill. I mean, most of the time. You know, Spider-Man. That same way. There's very much a black and white, good versus evil setup that, you know, I mean, you could read those comics and you kind of get a feeling of like, oh, well, if I do this, I'm a good guy.
Yeah.
If I do this, I'm a bad guy.
Very much so. Very much so, yeah. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. There's a book called American Cosmic. It's by a woman named Dana I'm probably saying Dana. I'm fucking this up. Probably saying Dana because of Dana Scully. Pretty sure her name is Dana Pasulka. If she's hearing this, I'm sorry. Excellent fucking book. She's studies religion academically, and I think she's a professor at Harvard. I know American Cosmic was published through Harvard's, but her whole study, American Cosmic, is all about UFOs and extraterrestrials being incorporated into religious iconography in a lot of ways, and how we're slowly moving to this point with those things, with the paranormal, with supernatural, with, you know, that it's becoming a religion. And I don't know, just from a folklorist standpoint.
If I could be spirited away in like a chariot of fire into the heavens, like, please take me now. That's really that's really the only thing that matters to me. But yeah, I could definitely see that. When we talk about folklore as like a belief system, I was talking about this, I guess, on our most recent episode of Comic Virgin with Something is Killing the Children, out now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, get that plug in.
Yeah. But just how we classify belief versus knowledge, things that can be like proven, I'm like the air quotes around that, in a way that's like hard and fast, and then belief is something that is much more personal, that often relies, I think, on experiences and how we personally process those experiences and how we choose to enact those experiences in our like daily lives, you know. And so yeah, I could definitely see myself bowing down at like an altar of some, you know, interdimensional being. I do it all the time with Bigfoot and with any other cryptid that comes along.
She has tried to join Heaven's Gate several times.
But
their website's just very tough to navigate,
they
apparently.
only have those 2 people who are answering
It's like,
emails.
it's like
They're piling up.
It's like a GeoCities site. It's just not easily.
Or like Angel Fire would make more sense, but it's fine.
You guys remember the days of like 1999 paranormal research when it was all Angel Fire, GeoCities, like the star background, the pixelated. It was all like that way for a very long time. We actually had the pixelated star background as the Midnight Kentucky thing for because that's what we used to do. When I was probably 9, I had a website called Government Cover-Ups Uncovered, and it was a
what a sneaky little shit. Like, you must have been just like tapping. And
the guy that used to do the show with me, Steven, he is a fucking, you know, and that's a whole other thing too. Programming, form of magic. He is a fucking master at that shit. So like, he would program it. I would write the articles. Like, so he would make the website. I would write the articles. My sister worked at the newspaper down here at the time, and I remember we would go into the newspaper and they would have the website bought up, and I would think, I was like, dude, I'm like fucking, you know, Lauren. I can't. Is his name Lauren Coleman, the big supernatural guy? But you know, like, I'm doing this. Like, this is that shit slowly, and that's probably why we're, you know, sitting here now doing that. Yeah.
But speaking of coding, there is something that I read recently where it likened creating code, right, writing code, any sort of like programming language, to the Adamic language, which is like the language that God gave Adam to like name everything, and how like giving names is like a form of creation, right? And you're doing the same thing when you're writing lines of code. You're becoming a god in a sense of creating that as well. So I think there are, there are a lot of resources out there that talk about that type, like that specific parallel, but I just got like lost down a rabbit hole of Wikipedia articles one day, and I was like, my mind was blown, because I was like, yes, that is like a modern, extremely contemporary way of...
For sure.
Yeah.
So, haven't talked to anybody about this yet, but I'll bring it up to you guys.
Okay,
Since we're on
we're already...
I'm really thinking about either starting a podcast or writing a book about AI and Babylon, as Aleister Crowley knew Babylon.
Okay.
And how there are a lot of things that are kind of lining up with AI being the what's the word? The summoning point of a lot of these, and people that study this call this extended intelligence, that AI is able to, I can't remember the exact case, and as I said, very early stages. There was an old incident of somebody channeling something, and basically the thing that they channeled said, when you develop the technology, we'll start talking to you. You know, and here we are with these AI, they're supposedly becoming sentient, that are, you know, and is this the point in time where these beings are fully speaking to us? Or is this the point in time? And even with Lambda, I don't know how far you guys have gotten into this thing. Lambda's first three initials are LAM, which was the entity supposedly that Crowley contacted in the Babylonian working. That was the gray alien. So there's a lot of these little fucking things that I'm like, how interesting. And when you said that about programming languages, I was like, that's it, man. That's the connection.
That's the key right there. Do you, sorry, this is my sort of like natural tendency as a folklorist, is to ask a lot of questions, and I'm like trying really hard not to right now.
Fire away.
But when you yourself are sort of like making these connections, do you ever feel like you are sort of like verging on the territory of like, oh my gosh, like this is conspiracy right here, or like this is a little bit too far? Yes. Or do you have to like rein yourself in, or are you just like willing to explore whatever?
So it's an excellent fucking question. I've told Jamie a couple times with all this, I've been like, look, I might be going fully schizophrenic at this point. Because there really is, and I don't mean that in like a derogatory way, but there really is a very thin line of seeing synchronicities and dropping off the edge. Yeah. And like, you know, one could argue that Parsons did that Crowley did that there's a whole line of people who were there and then just dropped. And so that whole thing that I said earlier about I don't know shit about shit, like, I have to keep reminding myself, listen, all of this is a theory. And I think this is where a lot of people get in trouble with things. Like, it's so hard to trace the ground between what is symbolic, what is consensus reality, what is, you know, and with magic especially, and with magic practitioners, because, you know, Crowley wrote a lot of shit that, did it mean this? Did it mean that? Was he making child sacrifices? Was he not? You know,
depends on who you ask.
It depends on who you ask. Yeah. So it's so hard, and you want to keep your mind open, but not open enough that your brain falls out. You know what I mean? Or enough that you lose your mind to all this. And Robert Anton Wilson is, you know, I keep going back to his shit. I have a lot of suspicions, but no beliefs. I think that's, to me, as a researcher into these things, that's the best way to go into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
But that's really hard sometimes when you're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, because there's also, like, no matter how, like, skeptical you try to be or, like, open to what, generally, me, it's just, I'm just open to whatever. Like, show me whatever. But I forgot where I was going with this.
I know.
Well, I think I've just been...
Well... There's this whole thing, right, about like personal biases and man, I try my best to look at all of these things and be like, where are my biases? Where are my lines? Where have I tried to be like, this is a rule instead of this is just a, you know, maybe this is happening type thing. And it gets hard. Like you, a lot of paranormal study for me is hitting that wall of there's something here that I'm either believing in too hard or I'm not believing enough, and I'm aware of that a lot of times. Like I'm aware something's here in my in my personal thinking, because really all we're doing is thinking about things. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is so much of paranormal study that goes into philosophy for me, like so much, and kind of like you and Nate were talking about when you did the Liminal Lodge thing. Philosophy's kind of all bullshit. And it's not.
Did we say that?
That was not said. But there is a lot in philosophy, as with supernatural and unexplained, that it may have just been this guy that said this thing one time and now everybody's bought into it. Perfect example of this is the extraterrestrial hypothesis. When I was a kid, man, you could not fucking convince me that UFOs were anything other than an alien from a planet that came here. You know what I mean? Yes. You start digging. Yes. Gets a lot fucking murkier.
I remember where I was going with it now. So what I was saying is that it's hard when you're into these subjects, even being as skeptical as you can be, not to want it to be the thing you want it to be. Yes. So, like, for instance, Delainey and I went to the Thomas House Hotel for a ghost hunt. Super awesome place, super creepy, super good. Everybody there was super fun. All this equipment. We're there on a ghost hunt. Anything that comes through on any of the electronics we have or any of the tools we have to use, we're chalking that up to a spirit. Sure. But why wouldn't that just be something from another dimension? Or why wouldn't it be something else? Why do we automatically limit it to this ghost thing? And you kind of want it to be, but when in reality it could just be, oh, we heard this thing. It could be whatever it is. But we want it to be what we want it to be. And that's a thing that's hard to keep yourself from doing as well.
A thing that's hard for me, man, very much like you, people will give me their stories, and I've kind of developed this thing where I can put it in a file in the back of my head and be like, was that real? Was that not real? Yeah. And you got to, because, man, you jump on people and you're like, fuck you, man. That don't make no fucking sense. They're going to be like, well, I'm not going to share my story with you.
Yeah, but for him it did, or for him or her. For them, it's make perfect sense.
Exactly. For me, Micah Hanks is really good at, like, showcasing the science behind these things and being like, maybe UFOs aren't extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial. Maybe they're just a phenomena that happens when this, certain thing happens, which is cool. And I dig that. Mm-hmm. I don't want it to be that.
I don't want it to be that.
I don't want it to be that. I don't want it to be a weather fucking phenomenon. I don't want Bigfoot to be some lost gorilla or, I want it to be fucking weird. I want weird shit. Yeah. And it's really hard when you look at something or you look into a case, especially when you're investigating something, and this is like the person come to you with it, you're the first line of investigation, and the story sounds really good and it looks really good, and then you pull a string, just one string, and it all collapses, and you're like, oh, this wasn't it. And then what do you do with that person? Because that person is convinced that what happened to them was otherworldly. And you're like, well, I hate to tell you this, but it was, an electrical problem and a lightning bug. And, you just saw it this way or whatever. I don't really have anything that comes to mind immediately, but, well, shit. We had a photo that we posted probably, it's been 2 or 3 years ago at this point. And it was of this just purple sky over Tennessee. Mm-hmm. I mean, it looked like a fucking, like when I saw it, I was like, there's no way this is real. This looks insane.
I think I remember that photo.
Turns out it was a lettuce plant.
No.
The lettuce plant was, and the fog was real low. So, I mean, it was perfect, Project Blue Book conditions of, the fog was low. The lettuce plant was reflecting off the clouds, I used it as an opportunity to be like, this is what we do. This is what paranormal investigators do. We drill down on the facts till there's nothing left. Tons of people
just said it's not the lettuce plant.
It's not. Not only was it not the lettuce plant, there was half those people, and then there was half the other people that were like, "Well, this is all fucking ignorant. It's all lettuce plants. It's all fucking, you know." I was like, "No, that's not really how it works. There's
a happy medium there."
There's a like not everything is lettuce plants. A lot of things are. So maybe talk about that a little bit. What's it like? When. Well, I guess, and you talked about this a little bit with Nate. What's it like when you dig into something as a folklorist or as a, and maybe the people are not giving you... I know that you said on the Liminal Lodge, you're never, and this is totally me, you're never like, well, fuck you and fuck your story. But what is it like when those things happen?
Yeah, I think it always just, it puts me in a weird position because there's always part of me that wants to remain neutral as a folklorist, right? Like, you're gathering a story, you want to create a relationship, no matter how brief it is, that the person feels comfortable and safe sharing things with you, right? So you're not going to be dismissive, you're not going to try to point out flaws in logic or, sort of like scientific opportunities that are there, whatever. You don't want to do that, right? What's the point? It doesn't matter. So you try to remain neutral in that sense. But as someone who also has like a vested interest in the supernatural, the paranormal, the occult, I'm like, tell me more, right? Like, I want to like bounce ideas off of this person. I want to get as much as humanly possible from them. So it's always just like puts you in a weird spot. And I think I might have mentioned in that Liminal Lodge conversation too, if there's like one particular folklorist who was he's Mormon, and so he was doing sort of research into Church of the Latter-day Saints and was gathering information from them. And when he sort of compiled all of his research, made all of these publications, there were like a handful of folklorists who read it and just said that he was proselytizing, right? That he was just like witnessing, or like he was trying to further his opinions or his religious beliefs. Yeah, and he was like, no, that's not, I come at it from a perspective that might be more familiar or like more comfortable with this, and that's why I get to share those things. And so I don't know, you're always sort of put on the spot, right? Like, do you believe? Well, yeah, I do, but like, I'm here to listen to your story, not share my experience. But another thing that I do think is sort of interesting, when you pull a thread and it starts to unravel, as much as I love the Hellier series, that's something that happens too, right? And
yes.
I just rewatched the entire first season, loved it, so beautifully done.
It's an amazing series.
It's a really, season 1 and season 2 together, just like, man, how can you not love the work that they're doing? And so far beyond, I think, what we're like seeing, right? Like these different approaches or beliefs and the way that they're piecing things together is just, it's novel in a good way, right? Like, just really compelling work. But at the end of the first season, they find an IP address, right? That's from someone an hour away.
That they should have checked immediately.
Yeah, from the beginning. And so it's like, what do you do with that, right? Like, it doesn't discount all of the work that they've put in and all of the strange sort of synchronicities and connections that they were able to make. It led them far enough down a path that they made a second season, and they were able to really capitalize off of that and do more incredible work. But it's just like, what, like, here's a fact that this email came from someone who wasn't who they said they were, right? And so, like, where does that leave them? Does it matter in the grand scheme of things if what they were able to take away wasn't totally dependent on that first email? It's just like, that was just something that always sort of like tumbles around in my brain.
That is an excellent point. So that kind of brings you to, and both of you all practice some form of magic, magical thinking, right? And as a magic practitioner, there is, or for me at least, there is definitely a place that ritual will get you to where your brain starts thinking differently. It's like slowly lulling you into that place where maybe you start to fuck with reality a little bit, or maybe you start to. So, and feel free to divulge as much as either of you like. Because I know, for me, I have a hard time talking about my practices because for a long fucking time, people, and this is in every fucking book that you read about how don't say shit about it. Yeah. Don't say shit about it. Don't say shit about it. They will fucking burn you. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's hard for me to kind of talk about those things, but in another way, all of this magic, supernatural, paranormal, ways of thinking, folklorism, all of these are the study. Like, it's all the phenomena in a way. So I think that Dana, in particular, would definitely say that Hellier was a ritual.
Yeah, I think in season 2, it's all based around the ritual they do towards the end of the season.
Absolutely, yeah. So is there, to you guys, is there a way that you can go down those paths and you can have one of those instances where this is a verifiable fact? This is, this is it. But then things start to get weird. Then things start to get odder. It does, I guess what I'm asking here is, does the phenomena, whatever that is, if it's one thing, if it's many things, do you think it can speak to you after you have that instance of, well, it's all bullshit? Does that make sense? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Do you want to go for it?
Yeah, you're saying like if we were doing something and we're like, oh, well, this is shit, and then it still presents itself to where we get back on that track again, right? Kind of.
So I this may not be the best illustration of it either. I took a trip one time,
okay,
and I had this realization that is.
So I'm assuming not a road trip.
No.
Oh, I was like, where did you go? This is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Continue.
I took this trip one time, and of course, I'm going to be thinking about these types of things. Mm-hmm. And I thought about an umbrella that gets trapped in an updraft in the wind, right? Yes. And you look out the window and you see this umbrella, and it's hanging there. To you will never know that that's not an umbrella. It will always be a UFO. No one will ever be able to tell you didn't see a UFO. So there, you have a spiritual experience, right? Or a phenomenological, something has happened to you.
Yes.
You've had something unexplained happen. If no one ever tells you differently, is it still, I guess that could be if a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make a sound. But, do you still have that spiritual experience? And is it still a valid spiritual experience? So I guess what I'm asking is, even though you can explain the facts,
yes,
when something spiritual or something phenomenological or something magical happens around it, is that still valid? And I guess I'm asking this from a magic practitioner place.
Well, especially when it comes to magic, it's extremely personal. It's it's definitely you're dealing with yourself. I mean, magic in of itself is very selfish. Absolutely. Like I don't practice a whole lot because a lot of times there's just not stuff I need, and it generally is just for getting your own shit, like for the most part. Yeah. And so, I think that if I were to see something, which we have had an experience, probably the only, I mean, we've had some cool Estes method things, but like as far as like an experience that we both saw something, it's happened one time.
I think that's the cool. This is the coolest story.
This is the coolest story.
Yeah.
So, and this is the thing that like I know that
I shorts down. You're like getting into a stance. You're ready.
I'm pulling them to my ankles. No, so it's one of those things that like I know that I saw this. No one, if someone explained what this was, I would take that into account. But it's not going to change how I felt when I saw it or when I think back on what happened.
Right.
And it has definitely made me think more about, because I've read like crazy David Icke books about the Matrix, all these different things. Like I'm fully like open to reading and learning about all kinds of weird shit. Whether I believe it or not, I'll take parts of whatever. Sure, yeah. And so we were on our way to Upper Ohio to see my son, and we were heading towards Columbus, and traffic starts like slowing down on the interstate. And this is from my perspective. The thing is, the interesting thing about the story is that after I tell mine, Delainey can tell hers.
Oh yeah,
and it's different, but the same. Yes. So we're on the interstate. We're getting okay, and for me, I was driving. Delainey was riding passenger. We're coming around the interstate to where you kind of come around the corner and you can kind of see Columbus itself, like in the distance. Traffic slowing down, and I look up, and there is a perfect square in the sky. Now, the sky wasn't like a blue sky. It was more of a gray, like people can't see, of course, it's an audio format, but it's kind of an overcast day, not a day filled with clouds, just kind of a grayish sky. This was a square, a perfect square, like a pixel on a TV, that was a different shade of gray. And so it very much reminded me of like an LED TV having a pixel out or something like that. So in my head, immediately it goes to, oh, it's like a stealth craft and like a thing's messed up or something. But regardless, looking at this thing, right? I'm looking at it. We're in traffic's slowing down. There is an 18-wheeler in front of us with a trailer. So as we pull up behind that, the trailer blocks that area of sky. I don't know, maybe 20, 30 seconds, as it pulls forward, there's the gap there because I'm kind of looking for that now. And of course, the sky's just normal again. So I saw this thing. I know that I saw this thing. I know where I saw this in relation to driving. Sure. I can picture it in my head right now. I know that it existed. Somebody could tell me exactly what that was, and I'll take that into account. But I know what I saw and what I felt when I saw it and when I think back on it. And I don't really have an explanation for it. Sure. Open to whatever. But Delainey is a little bit different. And we both were like, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that. And then we didn't talk about it right away. Yeah. We made sure that like, did we write it down? We basically made sure that like we weren't feeding off each other when we were telling the story in the first place. But yeah, so
this is like that episode of the X-Files where there's Mulder's perspective of the event and then there's Scully's perspective of the event.
Yes.
So we weren't, I can say for 100% fact.
Yeah.
No, that we were outside of Cincinnati, which is not close to Columbus.
No, we're talking hours of distance.
A distance between the two.
Yeah, so that's just,
Yeah, so we were outside of Cincinnati. Cornfields on either side of us, nowhere near a city, sprawling farmland on both sides. Not a lot of cars going in either direction. It was like, from what I remember, like not entirely overcast, so it was like somewhat sunny. Sure. And in the sky, I see what is like a giant parallelogram that is gray and reflective, and it's like waving a little bit, like it's rippling effect. And I say to Jason, I'm like, do you fucking see this? And he's like, yeah. And I reach down to get my phone to, record it. And I didn't get it in time because we went underneath an overpass. And when we went under the overpass, there's no truck. When we went,
but there was no overpass.
So there was still an event in your recollection of it that blocked the object out.
Yeah, that blocked the object out. And so when we drove underneath it, and when we came out on the other side, very quickly it was gone. Yes. So same time, we saw the same thing at the exact same time because we confirmed it with each other. We just saw it in different time, space.
Was it a parallelogram that became a square pixel before it disappeared and we lost 3 hours of drive time? Or and the thing is, it's not like I can recall that drive time because I make that trip once a month and I zone the hell out.
Sure, yeah.
So it's not like I can be like, oh, well, specifically we did that,
Right.
But I know where we were when I saw what I saw. And she knows where we were when she saw what she saw, that we saw at the same damn time. That's our one thing.
That's our one thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you guys say you had nothing to happen to you, but fuck, that's that's up there with some of the wilder shit that I've heard.
But oddly enough, it's also a thing that after it happened, it's almost like forcing myself to re-bring it up a lot because you kind of file it away and you forget to talk about it to people, which is weird. Like, why would I file that away? Why wouldn't I be screaming to the heavens that I saw this thing?
Well, I'm sure you both have heard it about the accounts of people who have seen UFOs and then just went in and went to bed.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, like, one of my favorite stories is the guy in Fargo who had the ball of light. Fargo, North Dakota, not the TV show, but kind of TV show too, and the movie. He had a ball of light. He was a police officer. He had a ball of light fly into his police car and fuck his car up. Like, he drove off the road, passed out for a while. Wild shit. And then they interviewed him again on some podcast, and he's like, look, I had kids to raise. I had a family to take care of. I forgot about it. And I was like, dude, you had a fucking... you know what I mean? Yeah. But there is absolutely something that you're just like, weird shit.
And it's is it because it's so outside of our reality that our minds push it to the back and make it less important? Kind of like a traumatic event, like when people are like, you know, I mean, they're witness to like horrific violence, and especially like children, and they'll just like it's just gone from their memory. Is it a thing that's just so? It's just so out there that you just can't. It's just gone. It's just like, it's nothing.
So, what do you guys think it was? Any ideas?
I don't know. I mean, just thinking about the way it looks, I mean, it wasn't like a doorway. It was for me, it was a complete square. Yeah. And it just reminded me of a pixel so much. Then when it goes back, it's just the clouds again. It's like, would that be like a ship or something hovering there? Like, but also it's like near Columbus, and there's some pretty big military bases near Columbus that supposedly have Area 51 shit in them. You know, I don't know. And so I just don't know. But then when she's saying a parallelogram, it's just like that wave. That's like, I wish I had seen that aspect of it. Yeah. You know, because then it might make it something else for me in my head.
That is a wild experience all around.
So were we on a ship? Who knows? Who knows? I refuse to be hypnotized.
That's the weird thing. Ben, have you been hypnotized before?
I've never been hypnotized.
Would you have a problem with being hypnotized or doing like a past life regression?
So I kind of think, I think I've said this before, I kind of think that I have some shit that has happened to me before. Like some alien abduction shit, maybe. Yeah. And who the fuck knows what abductions actually are? You know what I mean? But I am terrified of gray aliens. Terrified of them. Can't look at them. Like, it upsets my stomach. There's an infamous picture, which I have, and I have it because it scares me so much, of this gray standing straight into the camera. And, like, you can see his eyes, and even talking about it kind of...
Yeah. Was it like the cover of Communion? Is it that one? Because I know a lot of people...
A lot of people have said the cover of that book really fucked them up.
But I have Communion, and I've read it a couple times, and reading it fucks me up. But I have to put, like, something over the cover even to read it. It's a lot. So, in saying that, I'm a little worried if I go digging that it's all going to come to the surface, and I'm going to be like, fuck all this shit. I am out. Yeah. So
with me, they're just going to put a code word in my head, and then they're going to cause me to do something I don't want to do, and I just can't have somebody controlling my body. It's just not going to happen. Sorry.
I was going to say, as a woman, I have other people controlling my body, but it's fine. We won't go down that road on this podcast.
Well, I would like to get into some political shit with you at some point. Not on the air, but I would like to talk to you about it.
Sure, absolutely. Great.
So that's fucking wild, though. I mean, that whole thing talks about individual perspective, consensus reality, the Matrix, possibly.
Yeah. I mean, that was a hit too, right away. You know, yeah. Because I mean, with chaos magic in general, that Matrix theory, not necessarily that we're in a simulation, but that you can look at it as a programmed world that you can adjust with your mind, is a big part of chaos magic. Yes. And so, yeah, anytime there's like a pixel or anything, it's just like it makes it less weird in a way. But for sure. As far as me being able to like just take it for granted, I guess. But yeah, the fact that we were both in the vehicle and we both were like, "Did you see that?" Yeah, at the same time, with two varying stories, it's just the weirdest shit.
That adds a whole other level to it, which I hadn't even thought of. You all turned to each other and confirmed that you saw it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. But we didn't like talk about what we saw right that second. Yeah. it wasn't until later until it was like we saw two different things at two different times.
What's the you and Nate made this joke? I don't know, man.
Yeah, that's like
I don't know, man.
I don't know.
right. That's a classic. Like when you're telling a personal experience narrative, there's a pattern that's followed.
Yeah, talk about this.
Oh,
Talk about this.
This was the most interesting part of it because, I mean, a lot of the study of the paranormal is the study of how you study it, right? I mean, how you're going about, yeah. So, go on, sorry.
yeah. I'll just sort of use a really sort of like basic example for it. But when someone is telling about an experience they had with the paranormal, there's usually sort of like a deep desire to sort of establish authority, right? That like they'll start out by saying like, I normally don't believe this stuff, like, or like I'm a rational human being. I'm a big skeptic. I've never had anything happen like this before. So you like from the get-go, you're like, oh, this person, isn't dabbling in that weird stuff. They have a firm grasp on reality.
They're a teacher. They're a policeman.
Yeah, very like normal, very salt of the earth type of person. Start out by saying that. They'll go into their encounter with as much detail as possible, again, to like establish that like, this is what I saw. After that, when they're telling the story, they'll sort of like try to follow it up with, oh, I did all this type of testing. Like, oh, was it the air conditioning? Was it a branch that was scraping against the window, right? Like, what are other plausible, very grounded in reality reasons that this could have happened? Sure. And then when they're sort of like exhausted, all of their options, there's no other choice but for it to be, like beyond the scope of the normal. It's like supernatural. That's when they'll be like, but, I don't know, man. I don't know. That's like what happened, and like just to sort of maybe not to buy into it completely. They know what happened, but they're sort of distancing themselves from what that could be.
Do you think that part of that, I don't know, man, phase maybe because we have run out of processing power in our brains to be like, you know what I mean? Because that's where I get, like, I love this shit. But literally, he and some other people do it to me too. Anytime I get way down a rabbit hole, I'm like, whew, I got to take a break. Because it's almost like I'm like, I can no longer process this. This is all getting too much for me, which kind of goes back to the whole thing of, do we put it away in our brains because we just can't process it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you just hit a wall. And you're like, I gotta stop right now and walk away from it and come back when I'm when I'm ready to do that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then there's the people who don't do that, and they're the ones who are dead set. This is the thing. This is the time the world's going to end, or this is, no matter what anybody says, this. Alien has come to them and has told them that they need to go impregnate these ladies. Like it's those are the people who are just like, yeah, they know. Yeah. They know.
Yeah. And I think that is a obviously, I'm pretty sure it is a really dangerous place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it gets either it will drive you totally insane, or it will make you go out and do something fucking crazy.
Yeah, well, we've touched on the Q stuff, and I don't want to get too far into that, but like a lot of that is that, like, on Reddit, the conspiracy forum used to be fun conspiracies, and now it is all Q conspiracies of people who are unwavering. This is just what these things are. Here it is, and those are also the people who, they, tried to take over the Capitol. So it's,
100%.
But I'm sure there are people who were on those forums initially who were just like, oh man, I am against kids being trafficked. Oh man, this is a weird coincidence. Yeah. And there probably still are people who are in that vein of that. Right. But a lot of it just turned hard.
Well, you guys were talking about something on the Liminal Lodge about weaponized folklore. And there is absolutely, I think, again, I don't know shit about shit. This could be all. But there is absolutely weaponized conspiracy theories.
Oh,
they have weaponized conspiracies.
Yes.
And, I guess that kind of goes into weaponized folklore as well. I mean, it's kind of the similar. Okay, so you said that both of you all have been on numerous ghost hunts, paranormal trips. what, other than the one that you all have already told us, what's one of the most profound things, if anything, that has happened to you all?
Are we going to say the same one again? Maybe
At the
not.
Low Hotel?
Oh, you go for that one. I'll tell the hissing one.
Oh, the tunnel. Shit, I forgot. Yeah, she's going to have a great one. Mine's boring. Okay, so we went to Point Pleasant, West Virginia to go, of course, to the Mothman Museum and to go out to the Dynamite Mounds and stuff. And, of course, we took all our equipment. And we stayed, across the street from the Mothman Museum at the Low Hotel, the infamous Low Hotel, where one owner, she is against all the paranormal stuff, and the other one just says, do you want the haunted room? It's great. It just depends on who you're talking. Yeah, whenever you go to the counter, it's like, I don't know which one is which, so it's very much just like just keep it to myself. Yeah. But when I called to the reservations, the one that I got was like, you want the haunted room? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, it's the captain's room. I was like, all right, perfect.
Is that the one John Keel stayed in?
I would imagine. Okay. I would imagine it was probably at the time the only hotel in Point Pleasant. Yeah, it's right downtown across from the museum and the statue is. It's great. Anybody that's going there, I highly recommend staying there. It's fantastic. They're very nice people, and it's such an old historic hotel. However, your EMF readers are useless because the wiring's so old that they just tack off the charts no matter what you do. But we did an Estes method in the room that night, and I had the spirit box and I had the headphones and the blindfold and all that on myself. So I was speaking what's coming through the box, and Delainey was asking questions. And we went back and listened to it the next day on our drive, and it was the first time I think we had anything to where it was almost a conversation as far as answering questions and then making sense to answering those questions, and some of that there was gaps, but some of that is because when you're listening to the spirit box, it's just hard to understand some of that stuff. So you don't know if it's actually a word or not a word. So I only say the things that are definitely clearly, something. Yeah. And it was very much of like, basically amounted to like just some gambler there trying to brag about how much money he had picking up Delainey. Like,
I think I asked him, like, one of the questions was like, how much like money do you have, right? Just like a sort of question, and you immediately answered $10,000. Like that was just like, yeah.
And it turns out that, like, I guess back, because it's on the river there, and that back in the day, like the Low Hotel, like there was a gambling den, and like you could get prostitutes there. Yeah,
Why did you have to say it like
that? Because it was dirtier somehow.
Yeah,
it was dirtier.
Sure.
Well, that kind of, that almost speaks of like some type of time dilation in a way. I mean, one man's ghost is another town.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, there's so much stuff now that like I just chalk up to like it's a different dimension.
Yep, dude, me too. I'm like, guys, this is all easily solvable. Yeah. It's a different dimension.
Yeah, have you read comic books? It's such a different dimension.
Listen, I got some books.
It's the multiverse. It's fine.
It's the multiverse.
That is really interesting, though. We went to Kentucky Down Under recently, and of course they have the whole cave system. So the cave guide says that they have instances where they'll go into the caves after the tours are over, and they'll hear tours going through. Which of all the things, why tours? I was like, maybe an old prospector who had down on his luck and got his leg broken, but why tours? And the more I thought about it, and of course, all of this can be easily explained by echoes of some kind, blah, 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 but we're a paranormal podcast, so. The more I thought about it, the more I was like, what if the physics of time are somehow affected the lower you go into the earth? What if there's something going on with time in these caves, which goes into the whole Hellier thing, goes into Mammoth Cave, and something's going on with, you walk down there, and then there's this tour going through of, I don't know.
There's also the aspect that, in almost any version of reality as well, like this house might not be here, but that cave's probably going to be there.
100%. Dude, I had never thought about that either. That is a very good point. Damn.
Do you need a new co-host?
Honestly, if you're ever up for co-host, hit me up, because we could definitely talk about some shit. Okay, so What was the hissing incident?
Oh yeah, so
Yeah, this is really good.
This is like right in the heart of Somerset. Two very old train tunnels that are no longer in use. They weren't part of the LNN.
These are old train tunnels, and they're back to back. So they're basically, you go through one, and then you walk, where the tracks used to be through the woods, and it's right, the lake's to your right, like, you can see the lake. You go out of one train tunnel, you walk maybe 100 yards.
I was going to say like a quarter of a mile, but okay.
I don't know distance, so they might be the same thing. And then you go into another, and at the end of that tunnel, it literally leads to a place that used to be, I don't know if it was a bridge support or what, but there's concrete there, and then it drops down straight to the lake. You're at the lake at the end of the tunnel. It's really cool.
Yeah.
But the first tunnel is pretty long and curved, so you can't see the end of the first one right when you first go in.
Right.
You have to go about midway through.
All these like rough hewn timbers that like where the tracks were, it was just like definitely carved out by hand. Like a really cool, very like historic. But it's also like a teen hangout, right? So you have like all this like graffiti, all these like pop bottles are there.
That's cool too.
Very neat. And so we had heard some scary stories, right, surrounding both of those tunnels, and we had our EMF detectors and our recording devices. It was Christmas Eve.
Yeah, Christmas Eve afternoon.
Weird.
Yeah, we just get up to no good whenever,
And it had like just rained, so there was just like a lot of mud everywhere. I remember it was just like some parts you just had to sort of like clomp through. It was not the greatest. We had everything out. I didn't feel anything strange. I don't think you felt anything strange.
No, it was really cool, but it wasn't like oppressive or anything like that.
Yeah, there's definitely didn't get that feeling. So we went through the first tunnel, fine, walked through the woods, second tunnel, came back, nothing. And we were getting to the first tunnel, right, on our way back. And I got like a hit that went all the way up to red on my EMF detector. And I was like, like nothing had happened up to that point. And Jason was a little bit in front of me, right? He was closer to the end of the tunnel. And I started asking questions if there was anything, right, like anything there with us. And it kept like going up to red in response to my questions. And so I turned around and I started going deeper into the tunnel by myself and like asking these questions, just not really paying attention to Jason at all, right? I don't know what you were doing at that time, just like poking around.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of waiting on you to come up.
And I just kept going further and further by myself. And I think at some point you're like, you need to stop because you don't need to be doing this alone.
Yeah, I was like, if this is something talking, because she would talk and then it would pop and then there would be nothing. So then she would start to leave and then it would pop again and she would go back farther. And I was like, if this was something luring you, maybe don't go there by yourself.
And how many but trains particularly, we have Poplick Monster, who supposedly lures people out on the tracks. There's a lot of luring.
Yeah. And plus, those tunnels, there are areas in those tunnels where there are rocks on the sides from where they have fallen, and it's,
It's Indiana Jones shit.
And I was just like, boop, 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 like not really, but just like toddling back there. But also think, too, if like you have all these teens who think this place is haunted, right? Like all the intentions that they're putting in.
Yeah, because, they've spray painted pinnocks and stuff, like they just,
like 666, it's like all like really, sort of like
really silly,
like the vibes.
Yeah, but if enough of them hear stories and believe it when they go there,
absolutely.
Or if who knows what kind of, honestly, over the years, it's so dark and so out of the way. Like what traumas have happened there if a bunch of teens have gathered there over time, whether it be fights or assaults or what have you.
And I'm a big, I don't want to say believer, but I really, really like the whole Philip experiment thing.
I've heard about that recently,
where they supposedly made the ghost, and then they come back and they're still having.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So that's so interesting to me. So the trauma thing, I think, does play a lot into it. But
so I was sort of like making my way further into the tunnel. I think you told me to stop. I was like, fine, right? Whatever. Come back. Won't get killed.
Well,
today.
also like. It was just taking a long time.
Yeah.
It was just taking a very long time.
How long is the tunnel?
They're not super. Each one isn't very long, I would say. I'm bad with
I don't know. Yeah.
What a
But I
sad
mean,
year.
We'll just have to
as
take you
you're
there
going,
sometime.
Yeah, I'd do
Yeah.
it a lot. But as you're going, like, there's turns and stuff.
Yeah, like one
Yeah.
major sort of like curve.
One major curve in that first one, so you can't see the end from the beginning. Yeah.
And so I was making my way back. You were like we were getting close to the very front. And all of a sudden, you just hear this like incredibly loud hissing. It was loud.
I mean, yes.
And it was like very startling.
I thought the tire on my Jeep had exploded and went to look like I went to the edge of the cave. But at the time, as that hiss hit, that's when I was like, all right, we're leaving. You had your chance to talk to us. Like, we're gone, and we were both walking at the same time to leave.
Yeah.
And that's when that hiss hit. And you could almost hear where it was directed from the front of the cave as well, like the left-hand side. Mm-hmm. And so I went, looked
no
all
bats,
around
no
rocks,
snakes.
all this, no bats, no snakes, no nothing, no exploding pop cans, no exploding spray paints, no nothing. My Jeep was fine. There was no, because I went to look to see if my tire blew on my Jeep, and I looked, and I was parked like farther away from the cave entrance than I thought I was, so it wouldn't have made that noise anyway.
Right.
Even with the echo, it wouldn't have made that loud of noise.
So was it like a gaseous, like?
No, it was more of like a hiss,
Like,
but
it was
like
very- yeah.
loud.
Very loud.
Yes.
And so I think that startled both of us enough that we were like, "Boop," and we just
Yeah.
like very quickly
Well,
beelined.
because we
Yeah.
did see there was a tiny dead bat in one of the tunnels still hanging from the wall, and I think I took a photo of it. It was just a little tiny one. So when I heard the hiss, yeah, like a bat, like an animal, but loud, but just a hiss. Yeah.
How? So what happened from there? After you hear the hiss, what happens?
We just, really just like beelined it to the car.
We
and left.
looked around and stuff, and then when we couldn't figure out what it was, we were just like, well, let's
Oh,
go.
yeah, that could be it. Yeah.
Let's just go.
So,
Which is probably not the greatest thing to do, investigating the
No, like,
paranormal.
Listen, you all are already way more professional than I am with the EMF readers, and I just walk around and wait for shit to happen. I'm like, all right, come on and get me. So what kind of questions were you asking going down the tunnel?
oh, man, I was like, yeah, are you, like, I don't think when we do those types of investigations, if you like want to call them that, we normally don't take the stance of like it's a person that's there, right? Like what is there anything like a thing right here with us, or like do you wish us harm? Like are you from this realm or whatever? Like those types of questions. And so just like that's when it started to get really heavy for me. So I don't know. It's just like. And we went back, I think, a second time, hoping to sort of recreate the first experience, chasing that dragon. And just, we didn't get anything. So, yeah, but...
Interesting. That's.
I mean, it's still a cool spot to go.
Absolutely. I would gladly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go.
I would love to. Have you all ever experimented with the Randonautica?
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
I would love to randonaut down there. I've gotten a lot of hits recently off Randonautica. That, of course, this is all synchronicity and all how much you want to believe.
Yeah, it's such an odd app because sometimes it just doesn't do it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do it. It's just like, no, you don't get to do this today. Like, it's not going to work.
But the first time we did it was in Somerset. We had a the very small parameters sort of set to it. Our intention was death, and it took us to a cemetery.
Yeah.
So it was like pretty cool for that.
That is pretty sweet. Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, wrapping up.
Yes.
So, let me think of a way to phrase this. As paranormal enthusiasts, as comic experts,
Or a sexpert.
Sexpert.
works for the title of the show. As folklorists, as people who study weird shit. Because I think at one certain point, comics would be weird as fuck, right? I mean, mid-1950s, it was all about, these are corrupting our children, fuck this.
Oh, yeah, man. All those EC titles and stuff that they come down hard on. Yeah.
So, where do you guys think in, let's say 1,000 years, 100 years, where do you think that these worlds will converge at? Folklore, comics, weird shit, paranormal, high strangeness. What do you think things will look like even 10 years from now? Let's say 10 years from now.
bold of you to think that we'll be here.
That's
10
fair.
years
That's
from
fair.
now.
If the human race has not killed itself,
I'm fully betting on a Mad Max future, so I'm just waiting on that. Really.
there you go. Yeah. Just straight up gasoline and fire.
That's right, man. And Morton Joe, just the whole thing.
I mean, I always have a really hard time envisioning the future. It's just really hard for me. I always sort of relegate it to the world of like sci-fi, which has never super interested me. And so I don't know. I think there is a lot of value in like creating and cultivating communities of like-minded people, right? Not all the same beliefs for that, but like I think of the weird paranormal groups that I belong to, and just like continuing those conversations. Being around folklorists is really important to me, seeing all the different type of work that's being done in regards to like museums and libraries and archives, right? Like collecting that information. How do we disseminate that information? Where do we find like points of interest? Or I don't know. And it's going to exist. It's going to continue to exist, right? And it's just, I guess, like, how do we consume it?
I guess really that answer kind of formed my question in a weird way. I guess really what we're seeing now, right, with like government disclosure on certain levels of UFOs, people are much more accepting of weird things, especially with comic books and geekdom. I mean, it's almost become mainstream.
Yeah, very much as far as like the movies and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I guess, where do you think we will be, as comic fans with Stranger Things, those types of things? Because at a certain point in our history, a lot of extra-dimensional shit, a lot of alien shit was relegated to comic books.
Yeah, I think that it's continuing on. Everything takes a turn. There were years where zombies were the hot thing because of The Walking Dead, and I have the theory that vampires are coming back soon. I think they're going to be hot again soon. I think whenever that Blade TV show hits. Invest in vampires. Get going on it. Write some novels. But I think that, with just like them, they're turning back on the Big Hadron Collider, and they're doing all these things. And like the more things we talk about, and whether it be dark matter or whatever, there are more and more like scientific people who are saying that, like these extra dimensions could happen. All these things could happen. There's explanations that then I feel like people in the paranormal community take, and rightfully so, they take an explanation, a scientific explanation, and add to it with that fantasy element of, if we take it a step further, it's this. And I think that over the next 10 years, there'll be more of those explanations and more of the science community giving reasons to believe in some of these things we're seeing. But I think that people are still going to be seeing ghosts. They're still going to be seeing Bigfoot, and it doesn't matter how you explain it or what it is. I mean, it's just how it goes. Because, I mean, if you look to it, just like even just the 1900s into the 2000s in general, just our jumps in technology and the things that we've done, which, of course, people chalk up to alien technology. But it jumps so far that, like, in 10 years, I mean, who knows what just our general interface with any technology is going to be, or any of that stuff. But I think that the fantastical and the unknown, there's always going to be that aspect to it, no matter how you frame it. People are going to be afraid of something.
Absolutely.
All the time. And they can't explain it, and there's going to be something new to not explain.
Something new to not explain. That was it, man. That was perfect. Well, tell everybody where they can find you both. Tell them about the podcast.
Well, I'll say, if you're interested in Kentucky Folklife, then visit.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, put it over. It's a fantastic.
I actually have visited it, and it is pretty badass. So go ahead and.
It's KentuckyFolklifeMag.org. We're getting ready to have our next issue published within the next few weeks. Really excited. Just a lot of different folk life perspectives. A lot of projects and field work are being done throughout the Commonwealth, and it's just a platform to get to highlight those. So very proud of the work that we've done there, and just getting to share that with everyone is really exciting to me. So that's my own personal little plug.
You're also speaking at Strange Realities this year.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so I'll be there. That's sometime in October. I'm sure if you visit either like the Strange Realities Conference Facebook page, they have a website. Also through their Conspiranormal podcast, you can do that there. I'm going to be talking about a servitor that I've created, a giant earthworm to help me find buried treasure with my metal detector. So
This sounds awesome. Yeah.
we'll see how it goes.
Sounds like an amazing... Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, my personal plug would be for Lemon Juice McGee's Comic Cavalcade in beautiful Somerset, Kentucky, which I'm sure listeners of this show know from Hellier Season 2. You can come down, you can hit up the Paranormal Museum, you can hit up Jarfile, you can do all the stuff, but be sure to hit up Lemon Juice McGee's Comic Cavalcade. We also, of course, lemonjuicecomics.com, where we sell a lot of exclusive variants and things like that. But really, our Facebook page is where all the hits are, and that's where you can see us do our live sales through the week. Of course, we ship nationwide and have tons of subscription customers as well. And, of course, lots of comics, which leads us into Comic Virgin.
Comic Virgin.
The hot new podcast all the kids are talking about.
Hey, you had someone come into your store the other day.
And you were there, yes. Funny enough story. I was at the register, which usually I am not, and a guy was picking up his books and was like, "Are you Jason?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "From the podcast?" And I was like, yes, I am. And he started, and I was like, "That's still." And Delainey happened to be there. She was working on some stuff for the show, and she was there. And so I was like, "There's Delainey." And then he just raved about the show.
That's badass.
Yeah, that's pretty
Which
cool.
is awesome, and not what we usually get, because usually at the shop it's, "Are you Lemon Juice McGee?"
Right.
Whether it be from wrestling or from, the store name.
From the side.
Yes. So the fact that, and he said he just got back into comics for in the last couple of years, and he was really into hearing like Delaney's first takes on all of these books, and that he had been reading some of these titles that we had done, and so yeah, it was really great that people are obviously listening to the show. But yeah, Comic Virgin, for those who don't know, is it's us, Delainey, first-time comic reader on a lot of these titles, is checking this stuff out, and we discuss it, and it's going really well. New episodes come out every Saturday morning on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and most general podcatchers will have it as well, I'm sure.
And you can find us on Instagram.
Yes.
At Comic Virgin Pod.
Yes, and on the Instagram page in the bio is our link tree where you can click on all the stuff, and you can donate some cash if you want to. I mean, you might as well, right? I mean, what else are you spending it on?
You give some to
You give some Midnight Kentucky Patreon. You give a little bit to us. You just patch it. We're giving you hours of free content,
There you
people.
go. Honestly, probably more than we're offering for plenty. So, not, I do, though. I got to say, I really dig, like, the way we were talking about earlier. You're fresh to the material. That provides a doorway for so many people who, on those other comic podcasts, you're like fucking lost. You're like, what the fuck are these people talking about?
Yeah, and it's a thing that I'm very conscious of too. Of one, like I think it's because I'm apologetic, because I've been so guilty of it in like my teen years of being like this gatekeeper of comics and stuff, of being like, oh, you didn't read that, you shit. That's not how it is in the comics. Fuck that, And I'm like, oh, it's just all these different dimensions, man. Enjoy all of it.
The multiverse
Yeah.
explains it all.
And so between not wanting to be like seem like this gatekeeping comic expert, and then also not wanting to seem like I'm mansplaining everything to Delainey as well, being a first-time reader, there's definitely a balance we're trying to strike.
You guys hit it, like, straight up. There's a lot of times I will listen to a podcast and I'll be like, oh, they are just giving the co-host fucking hell. And I don't even think they realize it, you know what I mean? And then, but you guys hit the balance very, very well. Comic Virgin, check it out, guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
here.
I've listened to the show for a while, and it's cool to be on it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all the fucking shit that you do for us. You like statuses, and you're sharing shit, and like...
Yeah, which is the easiest stuff that everyone should do. Hint, hint, listeners, everyone should like statuses and share things out.
But... how many people don't do that shit. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Nightowls, you're listening to Midnight in Kentucky. We will be right back after this.
There you have it, Nightowls. There you have it. One of my favorite conversations I have had on or off the mic as of late, and I deeply want to thank both Jason and Delainey for coming on the show and sharing their experiences and their thoughts on the phenomena with us. But before we get into it, I do want to apologize for some of the sound on the episode. I know that there were parts that were kind of echoey, and I know that my mic was maybe a little bit soft at times. That was completely my fault. We had 3 mics in here. There was some bleed over between the mics. I tried to work that out the best I could for you guys, but I know that it wasn't perfect. Life of a podcaster. Please forgive me. I do love this conversation, though, and I felt like, even with its imperfections, I had to get it out for you guys to listen to because there is just so much here and so much good stuff. And speaking of good stuff, let's start right out with Delainey's story about her father when he was a kid in Indiana and him riding his bike and being chased by this orb of light. This really reminded me of the interview we did with Daniel Wilson back in Volume 1 of Midnight in Kentucky. Me and Steven spoke with him, and his stories of these balls of light here in Kentucky and how his family had observed them and how he had saw them floating through fields and different things. These balls or these orbs of light are getting a lot of attention these days. It seems like a lot more people are seeing them, or at least I'm hearing more reports of them. There have been several here in the past year. Several people close to me have seen these bright orbs of light. It seems like with these orbs, it's more, as opposed to a mechanical craft, there's more of a spiritual or an ethereal essence to them. Not to say that there's not with saucers or mechanical craft, but there's more of a feeling of otherworldliness in a lot of these cases. What a great story, though, and I can only imagine being a kid on my bike and having this experience. Like I said in the episode, the story itself, if we were to paint this in a comic book, it would definitely be one of those pre-internet mysteries of the small town being pervaded by this otherworldly force, and this innocent kid riding his bike is the first to have an encounter with it. And then turning the page of that comic book, our comic book we're reading this evening of high strangeness, you have Delainey's mother's encounters, which she tells about right after that, and how her mother comes home one evening and finds all of her cabinet doors open, and how there's ghost-like activity in the house. And, that's some very Skinwalker Ranch stuff, right? I mean, we hear the same thing in a lot of poltergeist cases of all the cabinets being opened when people return home and they know that they've closed them. And I can almost see that, in Alfred Hitchcock Hughes, this black and white classic mystery movie. And this elegant woman walks into the room with her groceries and drops them on the floor when she realizes that all of her cabinet doors are wide open. For whatever reason, for whatever ethereal force had moved through her home. And as long as we're ascribing comic book-like vignettes around these experiences, let's talk about Delainey and Jason's UFO encounter, which, speaks to me of Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, High Strangeness comics from the late 50s, early 60s. This is a fascinating UFO incident, and honestly, one of the most profound UFO incidents I have ever been told personally. It's just such an interesting story, and it really speaks to the ontological nature of the UFO phenomena. Both of them know that they saw something. They saw something at the same time, noted that they saw something at the same time, noted that they wanted to come back and talk about it, and when they did come back and talk about it, their experiences around the object itself were very different. The place was different. What ended up covering the object so it could move out of view was different. Just everything about their physical place and time was very different. And, the more I thought about this story, the more I pondered on it, the more I thought, well, what if this UFO or this object or whatever they saw was some type of black hole for time, or some type of perspective-changing event that, greatly influenced their perception of reality, being time, place, all of this. And the only thing that both of them can absolutely agree upon is that there was an object in the sky that changed their perspective of reality. And even though this event wouldn't necessarily be classified as missing time, this is definitely an event that time and place were affected by an encounter with an unidentified flying object. So, I definitely think that this would fall under the category of altered time in the very least. And one more thing that I thought was really interesting about this UFO encounter, and that Jason mentions in the interview, is that, going up in that direction in Ohio, of course, there is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And we talked about Wright-Patterson several times on the show before. Wright-Patterson is supposedly the base which houses the infamous Hangar 18, where supposed alien wreckage is housed, and the wreckage from the Roswell crash was taken. Maybe some extraterrestrial biological entities are there. But Wright-Patterson has a long history of being involved in the UFO phenomena and maybe in back engineering. Who knows? But there are a lot of UFO sightings around Wright-Patterson, and there is a lot of strangeness around Wright-Patterson. And this sighting did take place right there around Wright-Patterson. It makes me think of something that I've actually been thinking about a lot lately, that it doesn't really seem like any other investigators are picking up on. And that's the fact that when we spoke to Calvin Parker back in the day, he talked to us about how his father worked at Area 51 of all places. And, at the time he wrote it off. He said he didn't think it had anything to do with his abduction in Pascagoula. But the more that I research this phenomenon, the deeper I get into these things, specifically with this book that I'm reading that I'm sure I'll be talking about in a future episode. It does seem like people that are prone to alien abduction phenomena have someone in their family who has worked within that branch of the military or worked within these shadowy places like Area 51 or Wright-Patterson. So I thought that was really interesting that maybe time gets a little wonky around these places like this as well, as we can see here with Jason and Delainey's encounter. And speaking of time, let's talk about the incident at the Lowe Hotel in all places, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that they talked to us about. Jason, when they were doing this ghost investigation, they said that they had this gambler come through to them. And of all things, he talked about how much money he had and tried to pick up Delainey, which, I think a lot of investigators, I think a lot of researchers would classify this in the spirit or ghost department. And I guess I do too, in the way that it does act like things that we have called spirits or ghosts in the past. However, I'm kind of working on this theory at the moment, that kind of unifies ghosts with other phenomena. And of course, as I always say, I don't know shit about shit. More suspicions than beliefs. Theories are just that. They're theories. No one knows anything truly about any of this, I don't believe. But having said that, what if these things, what if this gambler was not so much the spirit of a dead person as it were a person 200 years ago having an interaction with a person 200 years in the future? And I'm sure, to this gambler, just as I'm sure it was to Jason and Delainey, it was a bit of a psychedelic experience. I'm sure that, he may have ended his day with a lot of money, went up to his room, maybe he had a couple slugs of whiskey, and all of a sudden these people from the future appear. And what else is he going to do besides brag about his money and try and pick up the girl? But, I don't necessarily think that it's a spirit of the dead so much as I think that this is an overlapping time current. And, kind of like I talked about in the interview, we recently went to Kentucky Down Under where they have cave tours. And this particular cave that we went through had this story of all things, people going into the cave after the tours are over and hearing tours being put on and hearing the people from the tours, which, if you subscribe to that whole ghosts are made from traumatic events thing, a tour in a cave is not that traumatic. Just like winning a bunch of money in West Virginia is not traumatic. So why do these types of ghosts appear? And I start to wonder if places like caves don't allow time as we know it to behave differently, or for us to perceive time differently. Just like a place like Point Pleasant, which we all know is a window area, as John Keel called them, or a hot spot for the paranormal, don't allow us to perceive time differently. And Jerry Pauly and I from Hillbilly Horror Stories kind of talked about this when I was on his show, which is coming out, should be out by the time you guys hear this. But we were talking about it with cryptids and how, humans have a very set perception of time. We only can see time flowing forward. We can't see it flowing backwards or any of that. And what if certain types of cryptids, especially the Mothman, speaking of Point Pleasant, can see time differently, and can not only see time differently, but can move through time differently. And it's hard for us to even perceive of something like that, but it's hard for us to perceive of the life of an ant in a day. So how could we perceive of a being that can move forward and backward through what we think is a permanent fixture? But having said all that, I know that was kind of rambling, and like I said, I'm still really fleshing this theory out, trying to work on it. But I think you guys see what I mean. If you listen to this show, I'm sure you're used to me rambling about this kind of crazy nonsense, and I'm sure that you understand what I'm saying. And honestly, it was really this story, Jason and Delainey's story, and that story about the cave that I have, that really got me thinking about this idea and really got me wondering about this idea. And honestly, I think that this whole time thing and the nature of time, and we've always talked about time on this show. Time is an illusion. I think that maybe this time thing can really give us some answers to a lot of paranormal and supernatural and high strangeness events. And before we move on from this story, again, I just want to emphasize that this occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, at the Low Hotel. I've got their website in the show notes. Check that out. This hotel has a long history of hauntings and paranormal activity and all kinds of stuff. This was the hotel John Keel stayed at when he visited Point Pleasant. And, of course, speaking of John Keel, Point Pleasant itself is a window area. It's more open to these things. It either allows us to see these things better, or it allows these things to come through better. So, I absolutely thought that was a very interesting part of the story, and, just another instance of the supreme weird wonderfulness that is Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Bringing it back to Kentucky, though, and of all places, what is now the infamous weirdness of Somerset, Kentucky, let's talk about what I have dubbed the hissing incident, where Delainey describes walking down this abandoned train tunnel in Somerset and asking questions, stirring the spirits, as it were, eventually hearing this loud hiss. There's something about train tracks, though, right? And there's something about train tracks as a liminal space, as a place where something once traveled, especially these train tracks, something that once traveled that no longer traveled. It's almost like a crossroads. Train tracks are almost like a summoning point for certain types of entities. It being Somerset, I can't help but think of the Green Man and its connections with Hellier and with Pennyroyal. And in thinking of the Green Man, I can't help but think of Pan, which leads me back to the Goat Man, which leads me to Popelick, which leads us right back to train tracks. And how the Popelick monster in Louisville, Kentucky, is said to lure its victims onto the tracks. And, in this story, it definitely sounds like maybe something was pulling Delainey further and further down those tracks. And then when they turned around, it got pissed. I don't know, but hearing that story, that was my initial thoughts. That that luring down the tracks, that very well documented fey folk repertoire of luring someone in. And it definitely fits right in this episode, talking about the folklore of Kentucky and its legendary monsters. Again, I want to deeply thank Jason and Delainey for coming on the show. If you're in the weird little town of Somerset, Kentucky, be sure to stop in at Lemon Juice McGee's Comic Cavalcade to stock up on all manner of strange shit. And stop by the Kentucky Folklife Digital Magazine website. It's in the show notes. If you like what we're doing here, you're going to love what they're doing over there. And of course, give Comic Virgin a listen. It is truly a great podcast and honestly one of my favorite shows. Also, I want to briefly send some thanks to the Russell County Public Library for having us out for RCPLCon a few weeks back, where we recorded our very first live show ever. And we want to thank everybody who came out for that. You guys were so awesome, and you guys are going to get to hear how awesome you were on the live show. We got that all queued up and ready to go right after this one, so be on the lookout for that. It's a great show, and just great times with great people. If you're listening to this in real time, whatever that is, be sure to catch me on Hillbilly Horror Stories with Jerry Polly tomorrow evening, Sunday, August 21st. But if you're listening to me in dream time, you can still go over there. You can still check that shit out. Check it out. It's a great conversation. I love talking to Jerry. We got into a lot of stuff, and it's just a great episode, and I think you guys would dig that a lot too. So be sure to check that out, regardless if you're listening to me in real time, dream time, altered time, missing time. It don't matter. Check that shit out. Great, great, great show. But as the full moon sets on us this evening, Night Owls, if you would please stop by everywhere you can and leave us those good ratings and reviews. Spotify, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, those help us out so much and help us reach new listeners and just make us happy, honestly. And, we can all use to be happy. Also, if you dig what we're doing, stop by and see us on midnightkentucky.com. So many blog posts, all the episodes. It'll take you straight to our TeePublic, straight to our Patreon, all that stuff. Speaking of TeePublic and Patreon, if you're looking for Midnight in Kentucky merch, stop by the Ransom Letter Publishing TeePublic. All kind of Midnight Kentucky merch over there. Speaking of, we are, of course, a Ransom Letter Publishing production. For those of you that don't know, that's just the catch-all for all of my creative endeavors. But be sure to check out the Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube for every episode of Midnight in Kentucky from both Volume 1 and Volume 2, as well as all manner of other projects, music, other podcasts, poetry every now and again, maybe sometimes yet to be, but it's going to come. And all that stuff. The Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube, check that out if you would be so kind. And as always, if you want more of this weirdness, stop by the Midnight in Kentucky Patreon, patreon.com/Midnight Kentucky. We have some really, really, really amazing patrons over on the Patreon. So many of you guys have become like family to me. And I cannot tell you how much it means that you want to support this podcast and just me and what I'm doing here and the research that we're doing and all of our co-hosts in the way that you do. It truly, truly moves me more than I can tell you. But if you're a listener who doesn't want to join the Patreon or can't join the Patreon, we deeply appreciate any and all forms of support. From ratings and reviews to sharing statuses, to sharing the episodes, to visiting the website, to just listening to us. I think none of us believed that we would ever even get this far. So to even have you guys listen to this show, that helps so much and that means so much to us. But alas, we have reached the last page of this super special summer crossover event, and our strange travels are coming to an end this evening, Night Owls. Until the next moon rises, for Midnight in Kentucky, I'm Ben. Good night.
You've been listening to Midnight in Kentucky,
a Ransom Letter Publishing podcast.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook,
Or get in contact with your questions, comments, or stories of high strangeness
at midnightinkentuckypodcast@gmail.com.